Welcome to Spotlight. I'm your host, Amitha. Join us weekly to get inspired towards informed change. As the world's population increases, the oil and natural gas industry is in demand. Canada has the potential to be a world leader in the sustainable energy industry. However, there are challenges, especially those from environmentalists. Today, we have two experts to talk to us about this hot topic. It's my pleasure to welcome to our show the President and CEO of Rife Resources, Mr. Tom Mullane, and the President and CEO of Canada's second largest natural gas producer, Tourmaline, Mr. Mike Rose. It's an honor to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Amitha.
So it's a really important topic we want to get into. But before that, can you briefly tell us a little bit of your background that will help the audience understand that what you're saying today would be valid based on your expertise?
Mike?
Sure. Well, I'm a geologist, and I actually grew up in Ontario, in Streetsville. I moved out west in 1979, so I've been working in the industry for 40 years. I worked for Shell from 79 till 93, and then decided to go and pursue a career in the independent side of the oil and gas industry. So I've been fortunate enough to found and run three different oil and gas companies. The first one was Berkeley Petroleum, which ultimately was sold to a U.S. company, Anadarko, in 2001, and then had a company called Duvernay Oil Corp. That was ultimately sold, ironically, to Shell in 2008, and then Tourmaline Oil Corp started really during the financial crisis, so we're about 11 years old now, and we've grown to a relatively large company. We actually are the largest Canadian gas producer now.
So I should correct that.
Yeah.
Okay, congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks. Tom?
Yeah, both Mike and I are members of CAP, which is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. I'm associated with a company called Rife Resources. It is Rife itself is 100% owned by CN, the railway pension funds, and it's been in the oil and gas business for over 34 years, so a long time invested in oil and gas. I also manage Freehold Royalties that trades on Toronto Stock Exchange, FRU. And so my history is I was born in Calgary. I did spend some time in Ottawa as a youngster, and then went to U of A in Edmonton, and then had my career in Calgary in the oil and gas. I'm an engineer by training, and fortunate enough, I did work at Shell, just like Mike did, towards the latter part of that, I think it was in the 90s there, and then moved to smaller companies post that. And so I've been the present CEO of Rife Resources and Freehold Royalties for the past 7 years.
Wow. So there are common ties in terms of your backgrounds, and which, again, will validate what you're saying today, because of that shows that you do have expertise on the topic. Mm-hmm. So why don't we get right to it? Tell us about how you think the pipeline will benefit the Canadian economy.
Well, I mean, I guess when you're talking about pipeline, I guess it's the expansion of Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Yes.
That will increase production by about 0.9 million barrels a day to the west coast. How this will benefit Canada is that today we have a number one customer, which is the U.S., which we supply 99% of our oil to, and a little bit does get shipped out of Vancouver area through the Trans Mountain. By diversifying our customer base, like in any business, you don't want one customer. We believe we are shortfalling the industry about $10 to $15 billion a year in revenue because we have one customer who now produces the most, like 15 million barrels of oil a day. They're the biggest producer in the world, so they are a competitor. So they don't want to give us the best price for our oil, for sure. Mm-hmm.
What is your take on it, Mike?
Well, and pipeline to me means not just Trans Mountain, but it means natural gas pipelines and LNG, being a gas producer. So the first LNG pipeline and project is underway in British Columbia that is being built, and it's to come on stream in 2024, 2025. And we're excited about that because then it opens up much more market, just as it does on the oil side, for natural gas, and we'll be able to directly, via LNG, get our natural gas to China and India, and that's a big goal of our industry. And Tom was touching on it, the revenue shortfall we have by having one customer. We are constrained by egress, so I think ultimately, and Tom, you would share this, is we'd like to see 2 LNG pipelines and 2 more oil pipelines, the Trans Mountain expansion, and another one, and there's a number of potential projects there. And then Canada can, I think, really expand its role to being a true global energy provider, and as you know, we do it in a very environmentally responsible way.
Wow. So from the sounds of it, it like you said, you're showing us a vision as to how it will benefit the economy. So you're doing that as, community leaders in the private sector. How can the government support you?
Well, the government can support us, certainly on the federal side, by getting their shoulder behind these national railways and those that cross international borders. We need support. Doesn't matter what government is formed, but we need support to support our natural gas and our oil industry. One of the things that is happening right now is that the regulatory process is being hijinxed by special lobby interest groups, and we need just more federal support to get these projects done, and that'll benefit all of us. Mm-hmm. Like one of the statistics in Ontario is that in 2014 there was 80,000 people that were directly or indirectly employed by the oil and gas industry, by the supply chain. That has dropped by 20,000 jobs to 60,000 today. I think if we have a healthier oil and gas industry, it benefits everybody.
Good point. What about your
take, Mike? I echo that we need an expedited regulatory process, which involves the federal government to allow us to expand our egress as a country in a timely fashion, with the recognition that it creates jobs all across the country. So, it's a huge economic win for Canada. And then, as you move to the environmental front, as it's pretty clear that Canada probably produces the cleanest hydrocarbon molecules on a mission basis, and so will actually help the global atmosphere by building these 2 to 4 new pipelines that we need. So it's a multiple win for Canada, and then it creates revenue for all the social programs that the federal and provincial governments distribute, and so it kind of floats down to the entire population, and we'll have more revenue to work with. So more schools, hospitals, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a win on many fronts for the country and the world.
Well, both of you have made good points on this. We want to talk to you more about the topic, but before that, it's time for a short break. Welcome back to Spotlight. We are talking to the President and CEO of Rife Resources, Mr. Tom Mullane, and the President and CEO of Tourmaline, Mr. Mike Rose. So you have given us a bit of a background as to how investing in the different pipelines can help our economy. Now let's take a step back and go back to the point that you brought up about how U.S. has now turned to be a competitor rather than a customer. So give us your thoughts on that as to what might be some of the risks, or can Canada have more opportunities in that case?
I think the U.S. oil and gas industry is a competitor right now. I think we still want to sell hydrocarbons to them, but it just makes infinite amount of sense to diversify our marketing portfolio, if you like, and sell to other countries. And we do need world price for our hydrocarbons, and we're not getting it right now. And I'd make the added point that the really good Canadian E&Ps, as we call them, that's exploration and production companies, so the producers, I think we're amongst the most efficient users of capital in the world. So our cost structures are actually better than our U.S. competitors, and despite challenging commodity prices, we actually have better earnings and returns for shareholders. So we have such a good engine of growth, and we just want to use it and get the right price for our hydrocarbons.
So why is it that how is it that the general public can know about this, like that it is better in Canada?
Well, Tom needs to spend more time telling people. Yeah.
Well, one of the things is Canada has one of the best regulatory systems in the world. When one of the facts that came out is when the North Sea was developing, they looked all across the world on the regulation that is happening in the world, and they modeled their regulations on the ERCB at the time, but that we have in Alberta, that regulates the industry. We are one of the safest, most responsible industries, oil and gas industries in the world. I've worked in Russia for 2 years in my history. I do have a fairly good comparative on how we treat the environment versus other potential nations, and we do the top notch. We are the best at what we do.
Oh, so that's great. With your international experience, you can actually vouch for the fact that Canada is really well, regulated.
And
so,
it's safe to say that our environmental performance and our standards are in Canada much higher than they are in the United States. I mean, we don't flare large volumes of gas, but they actually are right now in the Permian and the Bakken in the United States. We don't do that. And so I think the world needs more of us.
So now that is the opportunity we are moving towards, capturing the international market. So what are some of the steps, you can take in that direction, whether it be on your own or with the government?
Well, I think the pipelines are generally better coming from industry, with the government expediting the regulatory process. And the projects themselves have economics that compete, and we don't need the government's help funding them. We just need their help making sure the regulatory process works in a timely fashion so that we can get them built, and then when the approvals are given, that they ensure that we're allowed to continue building them.
I think that's what the issue is that when you have an approvals for a project, I guess in any business, you'd like to know how much you have to spend, how long it would take to do the process, and what kind of fiscal regimes you would have. Otherwise, nobody would want to invest in something if they have no idea what the return is going to be. We need a stable kind of fiscal regime and a stable kind of regulatory system so that when something is approved, it gets done, and the fiscal regime carries through the projects. Some of these projects take 20 plus years, 10, 20 years to pay out, and so that you do need to have stable fiscal environment, and that's what we require.
Okay, so the key word being regulatory process in place, and then you can take the steps and move forward with this vision.
Yes.
Now, do you foresee any risks now moving into an international market? Away from U.S., who used to be our biggest customer, and now, like you said, moving into international markets. Do you foresee any risks?
I see more, nothing but upside, particularly on the gas side of the business. It's forecast by multiple different groups that the growth in natural gas demand in China and India alone by 2040 is an incremental 50 BCF a day. So there's a huge market for us to go and get our hydrocarbons to, and as I mentioned before, get the proper world pricing at the time. So we'll become a direct competitor with the United States in LNG. I mean, they caught the first wave of that, and I think they've brought on, about 8 BCF a day on the Gulf Coast, and it'll go up to about 11 BCF a day in the next 12 months. We're really hoping that we can see a Canadian West Coast LNG industry that, initially starts at 6 BCF a day if we have 2 pipelines going, and could expand to that 10 BCF a day as well. And we have a bit of a competitive advantage because from a geography standpoint, we're closer, and so that cuts down the tanker timing. Also, our climate being cooler, we have more efficient LNG facilities that require less power to get the natural gas liquefied and into the ship. So great business opportunity, and the same goes on the oil side.
Yeah, we see nothing but upside if you can have multiple markets for your product.
Great.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of positiveness in this vision that you're working towards. And maybe like Mike said, Tom, you need to work on getting the word out. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm trying.
We all do.
I'm spending all day here in Toronto getting the word out. So.
Great. And we are doing that today too for our audience.
Thank you.
We are going to go back to the East Indian and the Chinese markets in a bit. But before that, it's time for a short break. Welcome back to Spotlight. We are talking to the President and CEO of Rife Resources, Mr. Tom Mullane, and President and CEO of Tourmaline, Mr. Mike Rose. So you have given us some insight as to how, it's great if the Canadian economy can invest in the oil and the natural gas industry. And Mike, you touched upon the East Indian and the Chinese markets. Can you expand more on that from both perspectives?
I was talking about the natural gas side, but the oil demand increase from those two economies is enormous as well. Natural gas being the cleanest of the fossil fuel group from a emission footprint standpoint can really help improve the atmospheric quality around the world and particularly in those countries. And I think part of the plan of the governments in those two countries is to perhaps use a little bit less coal and a little bit more natural gas as the CO2 emissions drop by something like 50% and all the other associated particulate matter that comes from burning coal to generate your electricity. It's a little bit more efficient on the natural gas side. So there's kind of a double win. As the population grows, and it's growing at a much greater rate in those countries than it is in North America, the demand goes up, and then the cleanliness of the energy will be improved as well. So, the standard of living is better for all of us.
Great. And from the oil industry? Yeah.
Well, there is going to be a bridge to other energy sources. As Mike said, the world energy needs are going to grow by 25% by 2040, and still 50% of that need will be satisfied from the IEA in Paris. It said that 50% will come from oil and natural gas. We generate oil and natural gas product the most safe and with a lot of due care to the environment. So we think we should be the supplier of energy to the world. The world needs more Canadian energy.
Good points.
Yeah.
And we are going there towards the international markets. So now, again, coming back to, there's so much positivity and benefit in investing this, as we heard from both of you. But as you initially mentioned, some of the challenges do include getting that regulatory process in place and the lobbyists. So now tell us a little bit more about your perspective on the environmentalists who are against, for example, the Trans Mountain pipeline or so forth in investing in the oil and the natural gas industry.
Well, I think there's several groups. There's most of them are just kind of, I think, uninformed about how good a job we do on the environmental side. And then there's a smaller subset that is just against not just energy development, but any kind of development going forward. And it's difficult to perhaps convince them other than just show over and over again that we do it better than anybody else in the world. There haven't been any tanker accidents, and hopefully there aren't any. I mean, I don't want to jinx it on the West Coast. So of Canada, so we do a remarkable job, and there is an enormous amount of tanker traffic already on the West Coast without accidents, and the Trans Mountain pipeline, I believe, adds something like 1 net tanker a day, incremental to the number of ships that are there already. So it should be very manageable from a safety and environment standpoint.
And you already mentioned, compared to US, we are already doing better in that respect.
We believe so, yeah.
Yes, okay. And from your perspective?
Well, Mike mentioned, we've been operating Trans Mountain, I think it's 40 or 50 years already without a significant, or any that I know of, spillage. There is enormous amount of tanker traffic that comes from the Alaskan North Slopes right through that alley without incidents outside of Valdez, of course. But we Canadians operate very, very safely, and we've never had an incident, even though we use oil tankers today. And so we're going to continue with that very safe environment going forward.
Well taken. Your points are well taken. I have one question. If we focus on a certain sector of lobbyists, I'm talking about the Indigenous population who are also against the Trans Mountain pipeline. Do you have any words on that?
I think there are some Indigenous communities that are against some of the specific pipeline projects, but it's our understanding that the majority of Indigenous communities actually support building pipelines and increasing their involvement directly in the oil and gas business so that they can improve their own standard of living by getting these good, well-paying jobs on a permanent basis for their people. I do know that the Coastal Link pipeline, which is the first pipeline for LNG, every Indigenous community along that pipeline route, and there were 20 of them, support the project.
There you go.
One of the things that I don't think a lot of people know is that in the oil and gas industry, about 6% of the employees recognize themselves as Indigenous, and that compares to other industries about 4%. And the oil and gas industry is the #1 employer of Indigenous peoples.
Nice. So it's a win-win situation, and sometimes there's myths in the air, and I'm glad you've come and talked to us today and dispelled some of that myths, because what you hear and from indirect sources might be wrong. So today you've educated us a lot on the topic, on the projects. Do you have any final words for our audience?
Well, I think that Canada needs to have the courage to build infrastructure throughout Canada. That's what made us so strong, building a national railway, the highway system, et cetera. And we just have to continue to do that and support pipelines. They're good for the world and good for Canada.
Yeah, I guess the end is the world needs more Canada.
Well said. Well, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you very much, Mike, for coming to us today and telling us more on this hot topic.
Great, thanks, Amitha.
Thank you very much, Amitha.
Thank you. There you have it. 2 industry experts who have given us more information on the current situation and the future of the Canadian oil and natural gas industry. Well, that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for watching us. Continue to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and write to us at spotlight@ethnicchannels.com. Until next week, this is Amitha signing off, encouraging you to be an active participant in your country's organizations.